Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jillian Gray. Thanks for tuning in. The government may be praising their new deal with Oban Energies, but the opposition is calling that deal overzealous. In an interview with our news team today, Chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, Fred Mitchell, says the government obviously didn't do their due diligence with this deal. You see, as we understand it, the former PLP government also had a deal with Oban, but it only went up to the point of a letter of conditional approval, as they would not agree to sign the heads of agreement until certain conditions were met. Conditions the PLP are not sure are met even now, several years later.
The point we've made to this group is, that is the Prime Minister and his cabinet colleagues, is having regard to the conditions we imposed and their inability to meet those conditions. Is the government now satisfied that those conditions have been met before proceeding as they have with the heads of agreement? Well, we know what the answer to both questions is. First, we know that the financing is not in place because the man said he needed this approval to go and get the financing. And secondly, we know that the environmental impact assessment has not been done because they promised to have it within 45 days. So, under the PLP, they would not have met the conditions for heads of agreement.
Now, besides concerns over funding the project, as well as having the environmental impact assessment done, another cause for alarm is the fact that the non-executive chairman of the billion-dollar project, Peter Kerger, was accused of violating a federal securities law in the U.S. in 2005, a fact that Mitchell says is a big one. He said he could only presume that the government's argument is probably that because the matter was settled in 2007, then that counts as due process. An excuse he says he can't fathom considering the nature of the project.
I can't see how, with a project of its nature, where you have, it appears, the pattern of a man who has a pattern of carrying out what lawyers would say there's similar fact evidence of fraud from time to time connected with this individual. So how he can pass the due diligence in those circumstances, I have no idea. And that's the issue, which we've also raised with them as well.
The project, which promises 600 permanent jobs for the stifled Grand Bahamian economy, is one that Mitchell says could have only been out of desperation.
Our suspicion is that this thing was invented out of desperation because they have nothing else to show for the 9 months that they've been in office. And in the middle of this fight over the position of the speaker, they had to come up with something to distract the country from that. And so they came up with this deal. That's our suspicion. And until proven otherwise, that is likely the conclusion that ourselves and the country will draw.
In another 45 days, the environmental impact assessment for the project will take place. But ahead of that, the government has promised to table the entire heads of agreement in the House of Assembly. Tourism officials have a fight on their hands. They have to get the millions of cruise ship passengers visiting the Bahamas to spend more money in port. And this is not going to be easy, as according to Tourism Minister Dionisio de Aguilar, some cruise ship officials use their economic strength to force the government's hand when bargaining deals.
You know what? We were scared of the cruise companies. They're very good. You know, they pull a boat. When we don't do what they tell us to do, they pull a boat. Call up the taxi cab, we pull in this boat because that minister say we can't do this. So we pull in a boat. That's business, right? They're going to use their economic strength to try and force us to do what they want us to do.
But the minister insists the Bahamas has many bargaining advantages.
First of all, you look at a map of South Florida, we are the closest place to Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And if you're going to take a 3-day cruise, you can't do it in any other way than coming to the Bahamas. Second of all, we have multiple destinations here. They have invested significant amounts of money in these islands. I think it's much more important to say, if you want to go to that island, you got to come to Nassau. And the third thing, there are 90 ships, 90 cruise ships under construction now. Where they can go?
And Minister,
so I feel that the tide has turned, where we are in a stronger position to negotiate a better position than we were, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago.
The minister sees an upcoming sea trade conference with senior cruise ship executives as the ideal opportunity to address a number of issues. The meeting will include talks about the intention to privatize the Prince George dock.
I believe, in much the same way that NAD manages the Lynden Pindling International Airport, we need an entity to manage the Prince George dock, to remove the chaos from down there, to make it a pleasant experience. You watched the thousands of passengers come off those cruise ships, and then you watch what they go through to get from their boat through the gate and to Bay Street. And man, a lot of them turn around and go back. Why should I put up with this?
A look at cruise ship passengers' ratings of Caribbean destinations lands the Bahamas in the top 10. From 358 million to 373 million. That's an additional 15 million spent on personal emoluments, salaries, and allowances during the first half of 2017-2018 fiscal period. The midway point also saw the government collect some $881 million in recurrent revenue, an increase of $25 million over the same period during the 2016-2017 fiscal year. Now, despite the uptick in revenue, Minister Turnquest says the government recognizes the continued need to contain expenses and ensure that deficits and debt targets are met. Well, all talk about revenue being up and spending down amounts to voodoo economics, a prettying up of the books. Just ask the opposition's deputy leader, Chester Cooper, who also doubles as its point man on finance. Mr. Cooper, whose comments came during a press conference following the mid-year budget's performance statements in the House of Assembly, said yesterday's communication demonstrates what the PLP has been saying all along. The government has no vision, no plan, and no strategy for managing and growing the economy, as there was nothing new, nothing inspiring confidence. You see, as far as the PLP deputy sees it, the Minister of Finance's insistence on separating expenditure for debt reduction is disingenuous, as expenditure is expenditure. Mr. Cooper goes on to point out that while the government boasts of slashing capital expenditure by around 50%, at what cost? And how are public salaries $15 million higher if the administration claims it saved $75 million on salaries by firing and sending people home? The Family Island MP added that as far as growing the economy goes, in recent times, there's only been talk of repackaged PLP projects, particularly in West Grand Bahama, East Grand Bahama, and Lucayan. Now, in terms of the new investment, the government, he said, is clearly low on options. And as for the government's argument that it's still paying off bills the previous administration left behind, Mr. Cooper questioned when will the FNM take responsibility for the fact that it is now the government. Wednesday's House sitting also saw the tabling of a resolution to borrow some $100 million to clear up the Bank of the Bahamas' toxic loans. Created in October of 2014 by the Christie administration, Resolve took over $100 million in troubled commercial loans from the Bank of the Bahamas, thereby removing the risk from the bank's books. The hope was that the BOB would return to profitability. You're watching JCN News. There's more after this break.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.